every certainly everyone in the group, and Colleen Moore will be joining us in a minute or two, um, is either on Social Security or paying Social Security taxes. Uh, and there's a concern that has been voiced for the past 10 years or so, or somewhat less than that, that Social Security is going to go bust. The actual facts, according to the Congressional Budget Office, is that in maybe 10 years, if something doesn't change, the Social Security fund itself, which is all the excess money that people have been paying in over the past 80 some odd years, will go bust, and we will now be paying Social Security benefits for the retirees uh, out of the money that is being earned and paid by the people who are currently working. And the net result would be a reduction in the benefits being paid, uh, so that whatever benefits you were getting before, you would get 80% of that now. Uh, Obviously, people are concerned about that, and there have been a number of different suggestions that have been made on what to do about it. And interestingly enough, a a group from the University of Maryland did a survey of people affected by Social Security, and they came up with a bunch of different suggestions, um, some more popular than others. And then they took the additional step of figuring out the economic impact of those suggestions. For example, the number one suggestion was raising the Social Security payroll cap, which is currently 147,000, to a larger number, either unlimited or possibly limited at 400,000. And if they did that, they looked at the impact on the shortfall. And in the case I just quoted, if they did that, it would eliminate 61% of the shortfall. So therefore, that much additional money would be coming in that would keep the trust fund going for X number more years, given what they're paying out today. And there are others that we can talk about. But in any case, that's the background of what we're going to talk about. And any other members of the panel have any thoughts? Or we can start going in and talking about the various suggestions that were made. And oh, by the way, possibly suggesting a few others that did not make the top 7 list. Okay.
I think that it's going to be, very difficult to try to figure out the mathematics, and who, when, how they will retire, how old, and what's going to be the cap for people who pay in more now. Like for instance, you wouldn't want some of that additional money that's coming in to pay additional benefits to people now. The benefits should be going in the normal way they're supposed to go, not so I think it's really going to be tough to try to figure out just how to do that, but I think it has to be done.
Well, actually, they're doing that already. 147,000 of income. The way they calculate the Social Security is they take your top, and I don't remember if it's top 10 or 20 earning years, and they average that out, and they say this is what your income is. Now, if you happen to have worked 40 years, as most of us did, then you paid in more money than theoretically you're going to get out. And that helps to fund some of the other things, like, for example, a spouse's benefit. Uh, your your wife, in my case, my wife was a teacher. She didn't make enough quarters to qualify for Social Security on her own, but she gets half of whatever I get, and she will continue to get it after I'm no longer collecting because I died. So that money.
Does she get a pension?
She didn't work enough to get a full pension. There's a couple of dollars in the pension fund, but not enough to send her a check. At some point, she could request send me my $300 or whatever the hell it is, and she could get it out, but not. She didn't get a teacher's pension. She didn't work enough years.
Okay, she didn't work.
But I'm just throwing that out as
yeah.
a concrete example. There are children and adults who get Social Security because of disability. So there's a lot of people who are getting money who didn't pay into the program.
Yeah, I think if disability and that kind of thing should come out of taxes.
Yeah.
The money.
I have no idea why they chose Social Security as the way to do it. Maybe it was just because people
there was a big surplus in it at the time.
Yeah, and there was.
Yeah,
I mean, I agree with Paul, actually, that the disability and other issues, they should be removed from this and placed somewhere else. And because that is, it doesn't seem right, but it's I think it's a political decision. I think somehow made to do that.
What do you think the practicality is of trying to pull it out? One of the things that's critical about Social Security is it's mandatory.
Mm-hmm.
It's funded all the time. It's funded all the time because people are paying money into it independently. But if you pulled some of these things like disability payments out of it and put it into something that was optional, that had to be voted on every year or every 5 years or whatever, I'm not sure if there would be enough votes in Congress to do that. And if you had to set up another administrative program to handle payments, determination of eligibility, etc., it would increase the costs, I would think.
So they could have a funding mechanism from somewhere else, but administration could be same as Social Security, so that the income stream could be mandated somehow. I don't know how, and so that will come out rather than just come from the same part. But the other piece to this is that when you have more and more people retiring and fewer people working, that equation again does not square away. And at the same time, the number of people who are disabled, also we don't know how that is going to play over time, because disability is an unpredictable thing to say right away. Whereas the employment stats are there.
One of the things that I think we can agree upon is it is more likely that the disabled population is going to live longer than they did. So even if it's the same number of people, they're going to be around that much longer, so the costs will go up. And the real question is, well, there are two questions. One is you're going to find another funding mechanism, and one of the ways you could do it is to add an additional tax on workers. Right now you have
no.
Okay, so,
Not act, I'm sorry.
okay,
go
well, no, then what's the funding mechanism that would pay for it if it's not through, through FICA?
Um, income tax. That way
Okay.
it gets spread through, that those dollars are absorbed by every person that collects, that works for a job or has an investment or whatever. It just
Okay.
it just gets part of income tax. The what's happened recently is income tax rates have gone down dramatically, and they keep complaining about the national debt. Uh, we're spending too much money based on our income. Well, we're spending the same amount of money, you know, comparatively speaking, but they're not collecting the same amount of money comparatively speaking. So all of these reductions in income tax rate are causing the national debt.
Okay. Um,
One thought I just had in mind is the fact that in the very near future, it's already started, that the robotics are going to take away a great number of jobs. So people who were employed are going to have to either find another occupation or may be out of the workforce altogether. Maybe there could be some value to put some type of a fee on the robotics and because they won't have to themselves collect.
Well, the way you put a fee on robotics is you have companies that use them pay a higher rate, whether
That's
they
correct.
use
That's
them or
right.
not.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
That goes back to the same income tax formula then.
in a form, but it would now be a corporate tax of some kind or a business tax. So you get, I'm going to arbitrarily say you would get the same amount of money from, not the same amount, you get the same rate from the business, and sort of assuming a salary for the robot. I don't know how you do that, but you could come up with that. Then a percentage of that quote salary would be paid by the corporation into some fund. By the way, this idea that the robots are taking over, in the 1980s, I was working for a company that was involved in robotics. And while I was there, I helped to automate a cereal factory, a Kellogg's cereal factory in London, Ontario. And as a result of what we did, the employment at the factory went from several hundred people to about 30.
Wow.
And that was almost overnight. Once the automation was complete, they didn't need anybody. They needed mechanics to fix things.
So did they get a lot of mechanics or no?
I tell you the truth, I don't know. After we got it working, we moved on to other things.
But then that means Chuck's formula would then impose a tax on how many robots they employed. Based on
yeah, in a
that.
sense, just to use the same kind of funding concept that that Social Security is, the idea of assigning a quote salary to each robot, and then taking a percentage of that and causing and having the business pay that into either the Social Security fund or whatever fund, disability fund, would be a way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Small businesses are less likely to use robots, number one, and number two, you could put on a sliding scale. So let's say a business that grossed $1 million a year would pay X, 2 million, or let's say 50 million would pay X plus 100 million, et cetera, and it go up in the same way as we have graduated income tax. We could have a graduated corporate robotics tax, and that would be a way that wouldn't invent something totally new.
Yeah. I think you just invent that just invents something totally new. You just take the income tax and adjust the income tax rate. If it has to go up, it goes up. If
Okay, that means that the
right
business,
now, I mean,
yeah.
they've done a real huge job on the income tax rate, and it's less than it used to be.
Mhm.
And the other thing is that there should be some cost to corporations, some income tax cost to corporations who ship work overseas.
Mhm.
And what I was thinking was if just something really wild or strange, if a company decides to send their manufacturing overseas and they decrease the number of employees, they would have to pay in a lump sum on day one, 10 years worth of Social Security and 10 years worth of whatever else that has to be paid, and that would go directly to the government.
Well, I can tell you again from personal experience, a number of years ago, I was working for a Honeywell Bull, and they were in the process of shifting a lot of their work, manufacturing, among other things, from the US to France. And I got laid off as part of this. And there were some benefits that I think the corporation paid to me. I know at one point that my daughter was in college at the time, and I think I got some money to help cover her tuition. I don't remember the details. We're going back 40 years, 30 some odd years.
Yeah.
But there is some basis for what you're suggesting. I don't know if it still applies. But at the same time, if I just stop manufacturing and start buying from another corporation that happens to be overseas, how do we get the corporation to pay? Because how is this different than I think I want to start selling pillows, and I don't make pillows, and I don't want to get into the pillow making business. I just want to sell them. I think I'll go to El Salvador where they're making pillows, and I'll buy X number. How do I make that corporation that never manufactured in the first place pay for the fact that there's more manufacturing being done in El Salvador?
Well, that's an importation company rather than manufacturing company. So that means the regulatory system is in a bind now. But you have to devise some other mechanism to tax them.
But that's what Walmart does today. Walmart doesn't manufacture the stuff they sell. They buy it from companies overseas. And it's not even, in most cases, I don't think, under the same umbrella. They just find some Chinese company that is willing to sell what they want to buy.
I mean, that's how they grew, actually, from the very beginning. Yeah, their whole business model is that.
Right. So and that's not unusual. I'm sure Target does the same thing, and Sears used to do the same thing way back when. Yeah. So I don't know that that's necessarily a way to resolve the automation issue. What's more, even if everything is automated, there's still X number of people who work in an automated plant in the same way as they did in this plant in London, Ontario.
Yeah.
People who sweep the floor, people who repair the machines, people who plan production quotas and buy raw materials. If those jobs go away because it becomes too expensive to automate here, we haven't really accomplished anything, I don't think.
So that means the Chuck's formula will not then work. It will be basically going back to income, basically earnings-based income tax for corporations.
Okay. If that's a funding program, the advantage to Social Security, as I understand Paul's proposal, is that you're, instead of going after the Social Security fund to cover, for example, the disability, there's a second fund put together, and somehow or another it's funded, probably Paul's formula, which is take a percentage of your income tax.
Well, you can call it anything you want. I mean, you can call it, tack it on to the income tax, or have a separate tax. I mean, together they would equal what the income tax might have been, whatever. I don't think it matters what you call it. You just got to collect the funds.
Well, I think it's important because you have to have something that is mandatory, that the money is going to come in based on a formula and you can predict it. And the other part of it is that payments have to be mandatory, because Ron Johnson, who's the senator from Wisconsin, was proposing that we make Social Security and Medicare not mandatory, but discretionary, which essentially means that in the same way as every year there's a crisis about passing the budget for the federal government and passing the budget specifically for defense, etc. Now you'd have a crisis that the elderly would not know in August whether they were going to get any money or not. Because
my understanding of what Johnson said was along the lines that he felt these systems have to be evaluated and reconsidered, not that he's proposing a specific plan at this point.
Well, I read it, and it was a specific plan, and this was the way to force a reevaluation. And I'm not necessarily saying a reevaluation is a bad thing, but it would have some effects on existing people and, oh, by the way, people in the future. But the idea of making it have to be approved every single year or every 5 years or whatever the rule is, I think it's demonstrably a serious problem. And if you're living more or less on Social Security, as opposed to Social Security being a supplement, it's frightening. Every goddamn year, you're not sure if you're eating or not, whether you're going to pay your rent, whether you're going to be able to buy medicine.
I mean, that's a similar thing what they had proposed a few years ago, that the whole Social Security should become commercial and make it stock based or something like that. And that's the same vagaries of the stock market would just basically make it collapse, I would imagine.
Well, it's a little scarier than that. I think it was back in the 90s. There was investment firms that used to go in and privatize massive corporations. I can't remember what the cigarette company was that they did it to. And the way they did it was they borrowed money, bought the stock at a good price. People sold them the stock. They then privatized the company. And then they took the pension money that the employees had been accumulating, used that to pay off their loans, And now they own the company free and clear. And oh, by the way, the pension was in deep shit. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Uh, that kind of a thing would scare the heck out of me if you wanted to privatize the administration.
Isn't that what Bain's company used to do? Bain and Company or Bain Company? Bain's company.
I think they were involved in it, but they weren't the big player. There was
Okay.
at least one or two other players that were
Okay.
massive players.
That
They
was,
made
that was the current senator from Utah, who was our,
Romney. Yeah,
yeah,
I don't. I think he was involved in it, but I don't think he was one of the key players. I think they did some of it, but not nearly. They weren't the ones who took over the cigarette company, for example.
But they were involved in the process, I thought,
Could be.
in the logistics and all that, and they could took the money, and that was the end of that.
Yeah, and after they privatized and paid off all their loans, they then went public, and they took all of the money because they were selling their company. And again, more power to clever people. But what about the poor
they
SOB?
burn in hell.
The poor SOB who had been paying his pension and suddenly that wasn't there anymore. And oh, by the way, the federal government eventually had to go in and guarantee the pensions and make them whole again. So it was not a harmless prank by any means. We should go on to some of the other suggestions that they came up with in this poll and the impacts. The raising of the Social Security payroll cap, as I said, there's several proposals out there. One is unlimited, and this is only earned wages. This is not other forms of income. Unlimited one was for 400,000. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren asked for 250,000, but also said there should be taxes on capital gains and net investment in business income. Depending upon how you did it, it would have different effects, but the analysis said that if you raise the income cap to $400,000, it would eliminate 61% of the shortfall right there. So that's
Not
probably
bad.
the easiest of all the different things that they could do. The second one, in terms of popularity, was reducing benefits for high earners. Right now, there is a cap on what your benefits can be, no matter how much you paid into the fund, even at 146,000 per year earning, it'd be 6% of that. But if you said, based on, I assume, your income tax, that you would get less because you have income coming in from other sources. It essentially was going to be the top 20% of the people who had retired. And they said that in and of itself would be 11%. So if you did the two of them together, you reduce the shortfall by 72%.
So that, yeah, 72%.
Right. And I personally don't think it would matter to me. I a cheap SOB, so I save some money, and the Social Security is kind of nice, but it doesn't pay my rent. But there's some people who may have earned a decent sum of money and don't have available cash, so there'd be a cost.
Yeah, that is the cost, which I don't know how many people will those be actually, because they will suffer because they will have nothing else. And I mean, when you are older, you're not making money every month. Even $20 is a lot of money.
Yeah. No, and later on, we'll find out that there's a fair percentage of the people who are on Social Security right now who have no other income.
Mhm.
And oh, by the way, the income they get from Social Security is well below the poverty line. So one of the suggestions that would hit a little bit is to increase the payout based on some formula to get you to the poverty line. And that would obviously start depleting the trust fund that much quicker. There's another suggestion they had, which was raise the retirement age, which they started to do, I think, 10 years ago. It was 65 for full benefits.
Mhm.
You can still retire at 62 for reduced benefits, but raise the full retirement age to from 65, which is going up now to 67, already
70.
the law.
Oh, you mean the baseline? Yeah,
Yeah.
baseline. Yeah.
So it's already going to be 67, and the suggestion was raise it to 70 gradually. And according to the analysis, that's another 14% of the shortfall. So if you took the top three, that would get you to 86% if I did
86%. Yeah.
if I did the math right. Does that make sense? I mean,
Yeah, I think that's actually these suggestions look good, except that you have to make sure that you don't cut people off who are really dependent.
yeah, well, I mean, not everybody's in a position to retire 5 years later than
No.
that. We think of 65 as a retiring age, and we already know that's not true.
Mhm.
I personally retired early. I retired at 62. Again, I wasn't in a position where it was paying my rent, but it made a difference.
Yeah. But if you retire earlier, you get less money, right?
Yes,
You don't get the
Yeah.
full.
significantly
So-
less money. And if you retire even later, I think if you retire at 70, or I should say start collecting at 70, God knows when you retire, but if you start collecting at 70, you get more than the top retirement funds. I think the logic is you're going to be collecting that many less years.
That is the logic, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's obviously a possibility. The fourth one that people liked, oddly enough, I would have thought that this would have been more popular. 73% of the people surveyed liked it, was increasing the payroll tax. Right now, the payroll tax is 6.2% of wages, 6.2% of the money that I am paid in wages is taken as a separate tax for SSI, and the same amount is paid by my employer. So if we increased it, and one of the suggestions was to 6.5%, so 0.3% more, right there, that would be 16% of the shortfall, which gets us to 100% if we did all of them. And that's, of course, assuming, excuse me, that we have the same number of people working. But as Chuck pointed out, with automation, the maximum number of people working is likely to go down.
So you could just introduce that Chuck's robotic tax and increase the payroll tax and have all the other three items, then you are home.
Right. Now, is this something, the the rest of the things I think are suggestions for increasing benefits. But is this something that politically we can pass? I mean, I have some wonderful ideas about all kinds of things, but whether I could get the Congress or even the population to force the Congress to pass them, not so clear.
But if you have people like Chuck in the Congress, I think people would agree with Chuck that you have to have some way of compensating for loss of workers.
But right now, the attitude is, and has been for a long time among most Republican lawmakers, that they won't increase taxes. Their attitude is the problem is on the spending end. Reduce spending, and then you'll need less taxes. So, Chuck, am I talking out of school?
The spending is going up as a function of inflation, so you need more taxes.
Well, yeah, but in theory, because spending is going up, profits are going up, wages are going up, so you're collecting more. That's the theory. I don't think in practice it's working that way, but that was the logic for the tax cut in 2001. When was the big tax cut under W?
It was around there, and there was another one when Trump took office.
Right, but the big one, the really big one, the logic was, if you cut taxes, corporations will invest more. Nobody said that they would have customers to buy their products, but that's neither here nor there, huh?
Yeah, the problem is the corporations are investing more in foreign manufacturing plants.
Yeah, but that's their job. Their job is.
I understand.
Right. We think of corporations as being evil necessarily because they're making money.
They're mathematical.
Yeah.
I think we need to think about the math, and that is, as an example, every corporation that sells anything in the United States must have a corporate office in the United States through which those sales are made. You can't have a corporate office in, some island somewhere. Anything that's sold in the United States they have to pay to, has to be done by a corporate office in the United States.
But for example,
go ahead.
What I was going to just ask Paul.
Yeah,
we have Stop and Shop here. The company is from Europe. I don't know. Do they have a corporate office here?
They must have. That's what I'm saying. If you're going to have sales here, it's got to be through that corporate office, and they must pay income tax.
Well, okay. Part of that is, I think, already existing. I know for a fact it exists in the banking industry, but I think it also exists in other industries as well, where there's a subsidiary of the corporation, wherever it happens to have its we'll call it corporate office. They also have a subsidiary in the United States and probably in most other countries. But because of accounting, I can determine what profit I've earned in the United States as opposed to the profit that I've earned in Bermuda. And that's really where the name of the game is. And that's why the idea of a corporate minimum tax worldwide is being pushed. Because, if I claim, and by the way, that happens in other things, Enron in California, if you remember correctly, they moved the cost of things around. So when they sold power to one locality, they sold it more or less at the cost of providing it. And other localities, they sold it at a much higher cost. So they could manipulate where the profits were based on what the tax rates were. And it was all perfectly legal.
The problem I'm trying to solve is there are many corporations who have their overall corporate office in the Cayman Islands.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore we get no taxes from them.
Well,
They don't pay taxes.
in
And
theory,
they have huge amount of sales in the United States. So I'm saying those,
Right.
that profit and loss should be in the United States, not in the Cayman Islands.
the problem, of course, is it's accounting. And if you can only buy from a U.S. company, literally a U.S. company, because everything is in the United States, then you can't buy anything from IKEA. You can't buy anything from Shell Oil, because these companies
No,
have their corporate offices elsewhere.
no. They have to have a subsidiary corporate office in the United States through which all sales of that company go through.
I think that already exists. I don't know that. Maybe somebody knows better than I. I think that already exists. I know
It can't because there are many companies who pay no taxes.
because of accounting.
I think that
Because-
is, yeah, I agree with you, because that's what I thought, that because the head office is somewhere else, the accounting rules or whatever the rules they are, they make sure that the money stays where it is and doesn't come here, so there's no tax. But there was a movement a few years ago. I thought Trump was also for it, to make sure that they bring those earnings here and they get taxed. I don't know what happened to that.
I don't think it's happened yet. Although oddly enough, Biden just passed a law, which puts a minimum tax on huge corporations, whether they turn a profit or not. I don't know the logic of it. Maybe Chuck has studied it better than I have. But there's a minimum tax now on, I think it's billion-dollar corporations.
It's 15%. I don't know what the rules are in reference to it, though.
Okay, I don't either. I haven't read it to that extent. But there's an attempt, and the 15%, the reason they pick that is because there's, throughout the world, most countries are trying to institute that. Obviously, Bermuda is not so happy with it, but most of the world is trying to do exactly that. So in that sense, you're accomplishing what you want. I'm not sure if having a local subsidiary is necessarily the way to go. Because again, I'm an accountant and I can say the value added on manufacturing socks is all done in El Salvador. I don't know why I'm picking on El Salvador. It's just one that came to mind. And there's little or no profit in selling it in the United States. So I sell it to Walmart for essentially what it costs me to make it. So I haven't made any profit in the United States. I've made a huge profit in El Salvador, but El Salvador has a very low tax rate. So they get minimum amount of money and everything is legal. And until you can change that logic, I don't know, other than what Biden just did, will make a difference.
Wouldn't that, although you said Biden got this thing done, but even then, wouldn't corporations play with the tax, these accounting rules and get that to zero again?
They may. I don't know I don't know how the thing works, so I can't comment on it. I'd like to think that whoever wrote the law was careful enough to make it difficult, if not impossible, but I don't know. It may be one of those things which sounds awfully good but has no effect.
So, everything that must be sold has to be sold at at this corporate office, and there's a sales tax.
Okay, sales tax, I think exists.
But it doesn't matter how much they paid for it. If they paid $100 and they sell it for 90, the sales tax is on the 90.
Mhm.
And they've lost money, but so what?
Well, and it may make financial sense to accept that. The sales tax, there is a sales tax, but it's on the end consumer, whoever the end consumer is. What you're talking about is a value added tax, which is typical of Europe, where each step along the way, every time something is sold from one place from one corp to another, the difference between the value, the difference between the cost of the item and the no, I'm sorry, I'm just saying that the cost of the item that you sold, there's a tax on it. So it's a value added. It's essentially saying everybody who makes a sale, they accrue some tax that they owe, as opposed to the United States, where you and I, being the end consumer, pay the sales tax.
But I thought value added tax also is paid with the consumer, even in Europe.
Well, it adds to the cost.
Yeah, so you pay it there. So it's not called sales tax. But I remember when I was in France, everything I bought, there was a VAT on it.
Right.
And so I paid it.
And it's like a sales tax. From your point of view, it's like a sales tax.
Yeah.
But the store that bought the item to sell to you also paid a value added tax.
I see. I don't know that.
So there's, from the beginning, from the guy who mined the iron that eventually turned into steel, that eventually turned into a coffee maker that you bought, everybody paid some amount. And obviously, all of that accumulated gets passed on to the end user, because otherwise the corporation's not going to make any money, and so they're not going to make the product.
So no matter what, the consumer is the person, is the one who has to pay. So
Yeah.
no matter what formula you use, but I think it's a good thing to have minimum tax on corporations so that they don't go and say, but there should be some way of making sure that they do not play that accounting game to get it to zero again.
Again, not having read the law carefully, I can't tell you that they've thought of everything, but I guarantee you one thing. I think of every possible way to game the system that we're aware of today. Tomorrow, somebody will think of a different thing.
Yes.
Or pass a law which said, if you do this, it no longer applies.
If any business has to pay some other expenses, including taxes, if they can't figure out a way of doing it that's not going to cost them, they're going to add it onto their bottom line.
Yes.
So we're going to end up paying that in the end.
One way or another, I agree. There's nothing free in the world. That's one of the axioms that we have to be aware of. The question is, how much are we willing to pay, and how much of the income that the federal government should be getting out of it, federal, state, local, every level, because they're all providing services that cost money. How much of it are they getting? The reason why automation makes a tremendous amount of sense, why Walmart and how they do business makes so much sense, is the prices are so much cheaper. Why is it cheaper? Because it costs less to produce. In one case, there's nobody involved. It's a robot. And in another case, it's people who are being paid wages that are so low that you couldn't survive in the United States. You'd be better off being a slave than working for that amount of money, because at least as a slave you get fed.
The millions of Uyghurs that are in China that are making many of the products for many of the American companies are making out very well.
The Uyghurs aren't, but the American companies are doing okay.
That's where the ethical issues come up, and oppression. I don't know how to solve that part. Maybe Chuck has a solution.
Well, if we don't straighten out this country in many ways, we could have China telling us what to do before long.
Well, I know the idea that because China has so much of our debt, they in fact own us. There's another way of looking at it. If I borrow $100 from you, you own me. You can demand that $100 at any time, and I may not want to pay it. But if I borrow $100 million from you, I own you. Because if I decide not to pay, you're in deep doo-doo.
Well,
So
China's having some real financial problems right now themselves.
Yeah. And at some point, they're going to start taking money out of the U.S. economy.
Well, they're doing some things with Russia and joining forces, the economies with Russia. It's monetarily.
Yeah, because Russia can't get access to the world economic system based on the dollar. So what they're doing is they're saying, I'll give you a discount on this huge inflated money for oil as long as you buy and sell in rubles. And both India, by the way, and China are saying, okay, we'll take the discount and we'll buy stuff from Russia. And it's good for Russia because now they're manufacturing. They're selling stuff to China and India, not only oil, but other things. And they're doing it in rubles. So there's no competition.
So does that mean there is a local standard of ruble now in that part of the world? And
I'm not 100% sure I could say a total standard, because I think China still does a hell of a lot more business with the United States than they do with Russia. But I think that they're willing to do this other standard, or possibly get everybody to do it. And I suddenly can't remember the name of the Chinese currency. The yuan?
Yuan, yes, yuan.
Yeah. Because China wants to establish that as being, if not the equivalent of the dollar, to replace the dollar as the world's currency.
That's correct.
Yeah. So,
I mean, but the sad thing about that is that there is no currency in the world that is now that's not standardized gold. Is everything? Everybody is printing this paper, and but
it's called banking. When I deposit $100 in the bank, they lend out, and I don't remember what the multiplier is, but let's arbitrarily say they lend out $500 based on my $100. It makes sense, because what happens is they lend out the $100. The person they lend it out to deposits that money in the bank, and then they can lend it out again. And because of financial rules, they can't lend the whole 100 out, so they're lending out, let's say, 80 of every 100.
It's basically the Fed gives them the money.
Yeah.
And then they have to maintain 10%, but they can lend out the other 90%. And then goes 90%, 81%, that type of thing.
But it's not the Fed's money, it's your money and my money.
No, it isn't.
Primarily. The Fed has recently been giving them money. I mean, zero interest rate means you give them the money. But
when we give them $10 or $100, they're just recirculating that money.
The-
Basically, what it is the Fed starts it.
There's a name, there's a funny name to that. I forgot the name.
It was
Paul
called
would
the
know.
multiplier. I'm remembering a high school
Discount rate. It's
economics.
called the discount rate. The Fed goes into their checkbook, writes a check for $100 million, gives $10 million to 10 different banks, and they turn that $100 million into $1 billion.
But understand something, the Fed doesn't just arbitrarily give money all the time. The only time the bank goes to the Fed for money is when they're running short. A bank, if it wasn't for the FDIC
No,
and funds
no.
transfer, a bank could be independent of the Fed.
The money starts at the Fed.
I mean, that's
Like,
No.
listen, please.
Okay,
In the between October and March of I think it was 2019 to 2020, the Fed created
yes.
what was it, $1 trillion.
that's what I was saying. There's a name to that. I forgot what the name
Yeah, there
was.
is. Yeah, there is. I can't think of it either.
But
They just
understand
created
something.
$1 trillion, and then they sent that money to the banks, and then the banks loaned that money out at a and the discount rate is 10%, so they have to give 10% interest to they have to maintain 10% of it in their coffers, but they can lend out
Right.
the other 90%.
But that's the FDIC that's forcing that. What I'm telling you is that a bank, the only reason a bank deals with the Federal Reserve is two reasons. One, funds transfer, the ability to be able to transfer funds from one bank to another is part of doing the business. And the other one is in case they get into a bind and they're running short on capital or cash, they can borrow money from the Federal Reserve. They don't have to. They can if they want to.
No.
They don't have to,
Right.
but they're better off, and their goal is always to do it via deposits, except when the Federal Reserve says, we ain't going to charge you any money for anything that you borrow from us. At which point, they don't care whether you and I give them any deposits. It's immaterial because they can get the money for free from the Federal Reserve.
Well, they had to pay 1%. Now it's what, 2% or something.
No, they were paying nothing. It was 0% for a couple of years.
Right. Okay.
So, and their big problem was to find people who would borrow it from them.
But it's still the money starts with the Feds.
They didn't have
No,
any
the
trouble
money starts from you and
finding
I.
people.
Huh?
They didn't
I'm
have
sorry.
any trouble finding people because the money was almost free, and that's why the stock market went from
Right.
23,000 to 36,000.
Right. No, I agree, because people would borrow money at zero cost, and if they thought they were going to make 5%, they would be overjoyed.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, that's how the banks were working. But it doesn't start that way. Banking requires you and I to put money in. And the
used
Federal
to.
Reserve was added on in the whatever it was, because otherwise,
1910.
Okay.
1910, okay.
And they figured it out. What they have is a checkbook, okay, and they lend money to banks. They also lend money to the U.S. government. That's what our national debt is.
And at some point, we become bankrupt if this doesn't.
Mhm.
And
yeah,
we'll be Zimbabwe or Venezuela at some point.
Yeah.
The Fed uses the interest to pay off the federal employees, but they don't really have any money. They just sit down and write a check without any money behind it. That's what the Fed is doing. There's no,
all banks were, it's nothing more, the Fed and other central banks, because it's not just the Fed, it's central